Do you need a lead-in?
That would be swell.
Welcome to the Hackaday podcast. My name is Mike Szczys. I'm editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
Hey, I'm Elliot Williams. I'm managing editor of Hackaday.
This is episode 138. Today we're talking about Breakin Bluetooth, Doritos rockets, wireless robots, and autonomous trolling.
So the Victorians, that is the government of Victoria, Australia, published their report on the Tesla Megapack Australian battery fire, and I don't know if this is ironic, but it was the cooling system that made it get hot. It dripped coolant on the batteries, and that shorted things out, and then it caught on fire.
Oh, I didn't know that coolant was conductive.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah,
I guess it must be. If it's got like antifreeze in it or something.
I guess it's good that they came up with something on the investigation. I think it'd be easy for you to kind of come up inconclusive.
If you actually go to the report and read it, it looks like they're still looking into a couple more things. They're insisting on procedural changes and increased safety measures in a couple places. They have to pressure test the cooling system and inspect it for leaks and things like that, which if they're saying that wasn't done, that might be a little bit of an oops. But, YOLO, right? And they're still looking at it. They say ESV, that is Energy Safe Victoria, will continue its investigation to determine whether there have been any breaches of the Electrical Safety Act that require further action. So we'll see. But it looks like when lithium-ion batteries the size of a shipping container go off, they get hot.
Well, on a happier note this week, we have moved into the wild card round of the 2021 Hackaday Prize, Elliot.
Indeed we have.
So this is the round for all of the really good ideas that didn't fit into the 4 other boxes that have gone on so far this summer. So let's say we had the custom displays, we had the supportive technology, there was most recently a robots one, and we had a innovative work from home round. But anything else that's a good idea that kind of makes technology work for more people and maybe makes the world a little bit of a better place is something we don't want to miss out on. And so you can enter that right now. There are 10 finalists that are going to move on from that round, each getting $500 in cash prize. And of course, come the end of October, all 50 finalists from the 5 rounds will come together and for final judging and a chance at the $25,000 grand prize.
Woohoo!
There's a bunch of other top prizes too. I always say like other top prizes and never actually look up what they are. So let me just hit up prize.supplyframe.com and see.
Clever.
It is $15,000 for second place, $10,000 for third place, $5,000 for fourth place, and $3,000 for fifth place. So there's a bunch of those prizes up. At the same time, I think it's pretty awesome just to, be recognized and to get $500 out to 50 different finalists. So I think that is actually my favorite prize in all of this.
Who wouldn't be stoked to get any of the prizes? I love the random one because that brings out the most creativity, I think, in a way. I don't know. I don't get to pick and choose. I love them all like they were my 5 children.
I gotta say, still one of my favorite ones of all time was, I can't remember which year, but we did the 5th round. Instead of wildcard, we did musical instruments.
Oh yeah, that was super fun.
There was just a lot of really cool stuff that came in on there. I think it's hard to judge that on building something that matters and make the world a better place. Although, what would your life be like without a soundtrack?
Music and art and everything is what makes life worth living.
And speaking of music, art, and life soundtrack...
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
What is that sound, Ellie? I know. And it sounds like a lot of our friends know.
Yeah, you really hammered this one. This was, not only did Mike know that it was the sounds of a singing Tesla coil, he was like, I asked him if he knew the band, and he's like, oh yeah, that's totally Architect. And it's kind of cheating, because I guess we've all seen them play live, and they're kind of the first Tesla coil band you'd think of. But,
oh, yeah.
But basically, everybody got this one right. We got over 70 answers, and 66 of them were correct. So you all noticed the Tesla coils, too. A couple people even mentioned that it was Architect. Of the wrong answers, the most popular was floppy drive motors, which is pretty good, too. I think I would be giving it away if I said I'm going to have to do that later in the future. Huh? I'm totally going to have to do the Flopatron later in the future. best euphemisms for Tesla coil instruments included the Zeus-a-phone, like
Yeah.
Zeus. Oh yeah, Arturo actually called it the Thoramin.
The Thoramin. Oh, very creative.
Good
That's a
job,
good
Arturo
one.
182. And a bunch of other people were like plasma speakers or resonant something something resulting in a plasma discharge, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, okay. You guys all got it right.
Now, did you machine that 66-sided die we were talking about?
No, but I took the time to create yet another random source of entropy that I've never done before, which was to take a picture with my webcam and then MD5 sum it, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to go modulo 66.
Are you going to take a picture of your wristwatch so that we know the date and time?
Oh, that would be clever. I don't have a watch. What can I do?
We don't want to give away when we actually record the podcast. Yeah.
Nobody knows when we record the podcast either. No, I'm just going to take a picture. You're all going to have to trust me that I'm doing the hashing right. Oh, no, you won't. I'll throw my code up in the show notes. So if you
there you
want
go.
to
Yeah.
generate random numbers based on pictures, if you are concerned that this is not going to be uniformly random, I can put your fears at ease. The MD5 hash, although it has been cryptographically busted, that is, there's ways to make collisions in it, it is still uniformly distributed when you put any number in it. So a source of randomness is as good as any other. Although the classic hack here, I guess, is to cover up the camera so you only get random background noise in there. If this picture has my ugly mug in it, it's not going to make it any more deterministic. So here goes. Let's see what happens. This is actually the worst way to take a random number because it takes some time.
What else would we be doing?
It has to take the picture of me, and then it says 16.
16?
16 is CM Balancio. Tesla coils. Congratulations, CM Balancio. We will get in touch with you and get a t-shirt out to you. Everyone else, good job getting it right. Sorry that we don't have 66 t-shirts to send out. Listen in next week and we'll have a new sample for you.
It's time to move on to the hacks, Elliot. What do you have first on your list?
This week I'm going to start off with 3D printed research robotics platform runs remotely. This is an awesome project 3 different ways. If you are into robots, well, this project's about a 5-university working group, the Open Dynamic Robot Initiative group, that's working on making dynamic robots of all kinds, 4-legged, 2-legged, more accessible by reducing the cost of making the robots themselves. And part of that is extensively using 3D printing to make the frames. They're still fairly beefy motors, so this isn't going to be cheap, but it is cheap compared to what you would pay Boston Dynamics for the same sort of robot. And that's almost the class of robots these are in. Serious robots for serious research, but not out of your budget if you're really serious about this sort of thing. If you're not interested in robots, there's still something for you here in this project because they run remotely, and there's a really cool hack by Thomas Flales here. What he's done is gotten ESP Now to run natively on Linux. And so if you don't know ESP Now, this is the Espressif ESP8266, ESP32 super low latency, super fast communication protocol that they run. And basically Thomas has reverse engineered it and got it running on Linux. And that means that these robots can communicate their state directly to a remote computer over essentially Wi-Fi, except it's broadcast Wi-Fi and without any of the kind of TCP or even UDP overhead. This is an even lower level protocol. To get this Linux ESP Now trick working, Thomas has to put the computer side Wi-Fi modems into monitor mode and use packet injection and all the rest of that. So it's like he's hacking the Wi-Fi. He's doing that to let the Linux computer understand ESP Now and communicate with like half of a millisecond's latency one way and kind of almost about a millisecond round trip.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't clue in on that part at all. I was mostly looking at the physical build of the robot, which is, it's so good, it looks rendered.
Yeah, I saw that first one and I'm like, yeah, that's a render of a robot.
Yeah.
Yawn.
It's like when the legs are all folded up, it's literally just a rectangular box. So it's like the outline of a dinner tray at a cafeteria, and maybe like 6 centimeters in thickness.
It's like a briefcase robot.
And then all of a sudden it's just like bloop, and it stands up on the legs. And then, there's always that like stereotypical dynamic balancing where they don't ever really stand still.
Right.
And I don't know, I kind of like it.
That's it. This is the Open Dynamic Robot Initiative group. This
Right.
is all about building these like dynamic balancing robots. And I said they had 3 tricks up their sleeve. One is cool robots. One is ESP Now for Linux. The third is that they're entirely remotely driven. And all the kinematics is actually done on a computer instead of on the robot. And it's all being sent over this fast ESP Now protocol. And the team claims that this is going to let them do significantly fancier dynamics programming for the bots, and also to change it up more quickly by keeping the hard number crunching on their bigger computers. And so that is actually kind of a paradigm shift in robot motor control. If you think about it, the bots usually have a computer on them doing all the math. And here they're saying, let's just put a really simple board on here, send the motor encoder data and current data and whatever else out to a computer that then has a fast enough Wi-Fi connection that it can control the robot in real time. So that ESP Now trick, you might want to use it for your own fun control schemes, but it enables them to do something totally unheard of with these robots.
So it's like the end of the original Matrix movie when those squid robots are like breaking into the Neuromancer ship, and then they take out the robot brain somewhere else, and the squids just fall dead because they don't have any of the smarts actually built into them.
Yes, it's exactly like that.
Yeah, if your Wi-Fi goes out, this little robot will just like tip over.
Yeah, if you walk up and you unplug his USB Wi-Fi dongle, like the robot, I presume, stops moving, falls over. Who knows? They didn't show that in any of their videos.
The e-stop is a Wi-Fi jammer.
Yeah, right? Oh, that's what you hope. You hope it just doesn't listen to random background noise and do crazy stuff.
Well, from serious robotics to not very serious rocketry that worked out.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can send a Doritos canister skyward. And now that's not really that interesting of a thing, except for if you look at the geometry of this snack packaging, it is not what you would normally look at for a rocket. So rockets are generally tubes. And so as Tom says in this article, it's not uncommon for you to see Pringles cans turned into rockets. And in this case, Concrete Dog grabbed a Doritos stack, which is the B team for snack foods for like mashed potato crisp weirdness. It's not like a slice of a potato. It's like mashed up potatoes that are formed and then, I don't know, fried or baked or something. I would imagine Doritos wanted to stand out from Pringles, so they made their tubes triangular with like rounded triangular engines. And of course, if you're into model rocketry, you look at that and say, I wonder if I can make a rocket out of that. And so, Elliot, this is where I really started going down the rabbit hole, because I've heard a little bit about the Open Rocket project, but I never looked at it before. And this caught my eye because he said he couldn't model this. He couldn't like simulate the physics of the model rocket he was trying to build because the Open Rocket program doesn't have the option for that triangular body.
Oh, right. Yeah. Why would you build anything else other than like a cylinder? Are you crazy? And the answer is, well, he had these cool looking cans on hand, right?
So then I was like, oh, you know what? There was this big rocket project back in May that I saw on Hackaday, and I never went and watched the video because it was a half hour or something. And it was Zyla Foxland's rocket, where she's like going for her level 2 certification. And the reason that popped to mind when I saw this is I remember her saying at the beginning of the video, like, I completely mapped this out in Open Rocket before I ordered the parts. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be a cool build, and I'll come back to it. And then here we are in September. And I actually went back and watched it, and it's a fantastic build. I mean, it's awesome. At some point, she goes, This is like, instead of this being a rocketry channel, it's like watch Zyla build things in fiberglass. And
Yeah.
it's layer after layer of fiberglass. She does some silly stuff like puts wood veneer around the rocket with like marquetry inlay of the name of the rocket on the side of it, but then, fiberglass is over the outside of it. But if you look at these, it's really interesting because the money for parts and materials that she spent and the time on labor on that. I mean, it's crazy amount of time of, laminating and then sanding and marking out and all, she's cutting jigs to hold the fins on. And it's really involved and very cool. But like, you want to make sure that thing flies. However, if you have a piece of effectively garbage, which is the Doritos can, and you just want to see, you 3D print a nose cone, you kind of guess on the weight of the nose. And then Concrete Dog said that the fins couldn't be simulated, and so just guessed on the size of the fins. You put it all together and you try it and you see what happens, because there's really not much downside for it.
There's a lot of ways to do fins. You can throw it up in the air, and if the fins make it point nose down, they're good enough, right? Like, how much more do you need?
Was this the one where they said they like swung it around on a rope?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, you could tie a rope to like the center of gravity and swing it and see if it points right. That would work too.
Yeah, it's check stability by swinging it around in a circle on a string. So the thing that I was wondering when I was looking at this is, how do you make the centering rings for the body that's triangular, but it's like not pointy? And I was like, oh, you got to map those in CAD and then go and cut them. And how annoying is that? And here's the thing about it. You don't have to do that, because you could just take and trace out the outline of the container on your material and then cut it out. But then who wants to cut it by hand? And so, Elliot, I had $1 million idea.
Mm-hmm.
What if you have a computer vision system connected up to your laser cutter, and you just use like a red Sharpie and you put it in your laser cutter and it automatically cuts it out?
I think you've invented like the Glowforge or something.
Well, so then I was like, oh man, I wonder if someone's done that before. And so I went and searched for it on Hackaday. And of course, yes, someone has done it. And I think I was the one who wrote the article about it.
You're a genius then. That's actually a great idea, because it lets you mark up on the thing itself where you want it to be. I guess you have to get everything aligned just right.
I would posit that it's 100 times better idea than the 3D printing pens, where you're supposed to freehand your 3D plastic prints, but freehanding your laser cuts. And not like, because if you think about freehanding your laser cuts, you often think about Etch-a-Sketch and like how jaggy and weird that is. But if it's not like, oh, I'm going to freehand with a joystick or knobs or whatever, it's like, I'm just going to draw this using whatever drawing things I normally do, and then computer vision's going to pick up that outline and cut it out. Like, that's pretty slick. That horse is dead.
On to the next horse. I could almost leave that. We'll see what happens. My next hack is Arduino Orchestra Plays the Planet Suite. This is kind of a capstone project for Kevin's exploratory synthesizer hackery, and he's been doing a lot of kind of lo-fi synth musical projects over the last couple years, and decided to just take them all together, put them on one piece of board, and program them all to play as if they were an orchestra. In this version, he's got 11 Arduino Nanos, 6 Arduino Unos, 1 Arduino Pro Mini, 1 Adafruit Feather 32U4, and a Raspberry Pi, all of them hooked up to MIDI cables on one side and speakers on the other. And they're all working through Gustav Holst's Planet Suite, and we'll play a little bit of Mars for you here in the background. So this is a really cool set of musical instruments, and if you're interested in kind of lo-fi noisemakers, you should go through. Each of them are broken out for you in his blog, and you can go through them. For instance, there's a Raspberry Pi that's running a sound font player emulator in there. The drum sounds are done by a relay drum kit, where it's just the clicking noise of the relays and some servo motors that kind of go scratch, scratch. But then I think for me, one of the most interesting hacks he does here is his various Arduino multi-tone and multi-Motzi string synth. This started off with just take a crappy Arduino and the tone command, which makes a square wave at a given pitch, and then write some MIDI code so that you could play square waves remotely by computer control. And then he escalated it by saying, I don't want just one Arduino note at a time. I want 4 of them or 5 of them. He wrote this really cute daisy chaining code where if the first Arduino is playing, it passes the note on to the second one. And if that one's playing, it passes it on to the third one, and so on. And what this does is it lets him use one MIDI channel for this kind of ensemble of 5 little Arduinos all playing together. He also uses the Arduino Motzi synth library to make a string-like synthesizer. And he wants to do the same thing, except here he takes a different tack. He has one Arduino that's the controller, and it responds to MIDI messages and then passes notes out to each of the other ones that are playing the musical instruments. And I think this is charming because by itself, one of these little Arduino Nanos is A, dirt cheap, B, not very powerful. And so if you want it to be doing all this work, both the synthesis and the MIDI response, it starts to get tricky if you want it to do that with polyphony on top. And so his solution is just, look, another couple bucks, I'll buy a bunch more of them. I'll daisy chain them all together.
Yeah, that's so great because you don't have to truncate the ends of sounds in order to make room for new sounds. If you just scale it up, you get such a better, well-rounded experience from what would otherwise be single digital notes being played.
Absolutely. And if you haven't played around with any kind of musical noisemakers, there is something for you here. These MIDI Arduino tone modules are the simplest possible noisemaker. And then he goes up the scale all the way up to a Raspberry Pi, and even some physical noisemakers. So, it's a lovely introduction, and then seeing and hearing them all playing together is pretty rewarding as well. If you're thinking about adding MIDI to musical instruments or making things control other things by MIDI, I have to give a shout out to Little Scale, aka Sebastian Tomczak, who is one of my favorites in this kind of area. I don't think there's anything he hasn't put MIDI on. I'll throw a link to his blog in the show notes. You should go check him out too.
For anyone who's been out fishing on a boat, you understand that the trolling motor is one of the most useful tools that you can have because water moves, wind blows the boat. There's all kinds of reasons that you need to move that boat around, and you don't want to turn on the gas engine when you're out there fishing in a nice, serene environment. And so Alex Asplund decided to take the idea of the electric trolling motor and give it some automation. So instead of driving it with foot pedals or with a little hand lever like you normally would, you can actually tell this hey, keep the boat in this little zone that I'm in right now, or keep heading in the direction that I'm pointed right now. Or you can even connect it to some type of GPS device that is doing path planning for you and have it automatically follow the NMEA instructions that it's giving you.
Yeah, I love this, and I think he undersells it. Or maybe I only think it's undersold because I'm not so interested in fishing. But this is an add-on that can turn your boat into an automatic autonomous boat. Although, a slow trolling motor autonomous boat, but nonetheless.
Yeah, it's got a really nice 3D printed cuff that goes around the upper pole part of the trolling motor. I don't know, for people that haven't been around these, you have a propeller that's under the water, and that propeller is suspended from a pole that's attached usually to the back of the boat, and then that pole can go up and down to put the propeller deeper or shallower, and then it can also tip out of the way to completely pull it out of the water so that you don't bang it on stuff if you're in shallow area or getting the boat in or out. And with this, it doesn't interfere with any of those things. So you still have all those things, and the pole can slide up and down. But in this 3D printed enclosure, there's a gearbox that attaches to a stepper motor, as well as a Hall effect sensor that can monitor. It's basically like a limiting switch or like a zeroing switch. So you know which way the motor is pointed based on how often it trips the Hall effect sensor. That's 0 in this case. It already connects to an Arduino through a motor controller. And then it also has a Raspberry Pi that gives the commands to that Arduino for the motor controller. And then the Raspberry Pi is the bridge to a really expensive piece of gear. Like I looked this up, it's like $600 or $700. It's a fish finder / GPS all in one that has like a tablet sized screen on it, but it's really just the protocol. So anything that takes the NMEA instructions or like can send out the NMEA instructions can then control this through the Raspberry Pi. So it's kind of extensible along that point. And then there's a web interface on your phone. So you can actually go on the phone and set the different modes or, like give it a new heading or just kind of see what's going on.
That's so crazy. I have to say, the next thing he needs is a robot arm with a fishing pole on it to just stick over the side. And then he could sit on the shore and just let his boat do the fishing for him.
Well, you just need to wait till winter because that's what winter fishing is, right? They put those tip ups. There's just like you just like hang a hook in the water with some bait on it. When the fish bites, it tips this flag up, and then in between beers, you leave your hothouse and go look for the flags.
Go fetch it.
I'm all for roboticizing trolling motors. I mean, this is we talked about it last week with the self-driving cargo ships. Like it's the perfect thing because there's just not all that much around you to go wrong. And like if you're fishing and just letting this motor go anyway, this just gives it a little bit more smarts than you having to remember to steer and not run into the shore.
How long has it been, Mike, since we've had a hacky hack, a security hack,
a security hack,
breaking things hack on the podcast?
Should I be worried?
Time. Well, it depends. Do you use any Bluetooth? And by this, I mean old school Bluetooth devices?
I have some Bluetooth, yes.
Then you should probably be worried. This article, Bluetooth Vulnerability, Arbitrary Code Execution on the ESP32, among others, is the presentation of a hack that's being called Breaktooth, I don't know, by Matteus E. Garbellini and co. It exploits some new problems they found in Bluetooth stacks. And because Bluetooth radios are kind of reused over and over again, these Bluetooth stack flaws hit Bluetooth modules ranging from those made by Intel and Qualcomm, Cypress, Bluetrum Technology, Zhuhai Jieli, which seems to make consumer goods, all the way down to Espressif Systems, and it hits their ESP32. And what they've found here is basically a set of 16 vulnerabilities where you kind of just throw too much Bluetooth at the receiving device, and it either chokes on the incomplete packages, you open too many connections, you send it a command and a half or 2/3 of a command and it waits for the command to finish. All of these sort of, just messing with the Bluetooth protocol type attacks turn out to have effects on a bunch of Bluetooth radios ranging from crashes to deadlocks to the one code execution they managed to get on the ESP32.
Yeah, and so I think the video demo that I saw of this is like super fast. Like you press a button and within less than a second, you see an LED turn on, which is the exploit showing that it can control the hardware and run whatever code it wants.
And these are all pre-authentication hacks. So, you can just walk by somebody's Bluetooth module and do it. A good percentage of them stop being active as soon as you walk away. That is, you can denial of service the Bluetooth, but then as soon as you stop kind of overloading it, it goes back to normal because a lot of these modules are kind of programmed with a restart if things go wrong. I guess they disclosed these flaws responsibly, that is at least 6 months ago now, and some vendors have patched yet, some vendors are still working on it, some are in progress, and some aren't going to. And among them, the ESP32 patch is already available and you're good to go. Also, the Infineon one. Some of the ones that are in progress, notably, are the Intel and Qualcomm ones, which are the ones affecting laptops and stuff. And it's really interesting. Old school Bluetooth is kind of full of holes in a way. It's got a lot of security problems, and we keep seeing this. And I have to ask, why is it that Bluetooth is so buggy? I mean, they're closed source stacks. It's a really complicated protocol in the beginning, and it's very carefully negotiated between the two parts, and it's difficult to make the handshakes work on a good day. And that leaves lots of room for people to, kind of send bad packets in there and mess the handshakes up. It's funny because I talked with Jiska Claesen about this. She was doing a bunch of Bluetooth attacks. We'll talk about her actually in another second. And she said the same thing that Matthäus says in this post, which is when you go to talk to the vendors, they say, but you wouldn't ever send that data. That's not in the spec. Why would you send these malformed packets? That's not in the protocol at all. I think there's some kind of sense in industry that Bluetooth is so complicated that everybody should just be trying to do the right thing. And there's this kind of belief of implicit compliance. And when hackers have at it, it turns out that that's not the case at all. Along the way, discovering all of these security flaws, Matthäus and co. developed a really neat Bluetooth classic sniffer, and I'll throw the links to the show notes here to his GitHub. It basically takes an ESP32 and turns it into an active Bluetooth injector. So you can try to connect the ESP32 over Bluetooth to whatever your other device is, and you have complete control over monitoring and injecting packets. So you can fuzz things, hook it up to Wireshark, hook it up to Scapy, create arbitrary packets, do the whole offensive research thing with it. A lot of this work is based on Jiska's old work on internal Blue, and so I'll throw a link to her talk at the CCC from a few years back, where she talks about her internal Blue tool set and how she goes about finding bugs in Bluetooth. If you read this post from Matthäus and you go back and watch her old talk, you'll have a good feeling for kind of the state of play in Bluetooth 4.1, 5.1 security.
Well, from a hacky hack to model engineering, Elliot, this is a recreation of the Hoover Dam and the bridge bypass in miniature, but still in concrete, and in fact in reinforced concrete. This is really delightful to watch the video, which comes from the Teeny World YouTube channel and shows building up rebar structures and then using hydraulic cement, which I've seen just before. It comes in like milk cartons and you just mix it up. It's really easy to work with this stuff. And the forms that are being used here are really awesome. It's extruded foam or rigid foam insulation. It's like that Pink Panther. I don't know if that's it's probably a local brand here. I don't know. The pink insulation. This looks like it's about 1/4 inch that's been built up. I don't know if they used a release agent on it or not, but they're able to get the forms off after the fact. But you build up the form, you put some what looks like miniature rebar inside of it, and then you pour your concrete on it, and you're doing, PE at your house.
Yeah, this is amazing because he's doing exactly the same thing you would do to build the original bridge, just in small. And I mean, I guess that's kind of the point of making scale models, but usually people just make it look like the original thing. And here it's kind of like doing model engineering rather than just model making in some way.
And it's out in like a dirt pile in the backyard. I mean, it's the side of a pond, but you got to think this is like somebody's backyard that they're working in. So it'd be like if you were playing, trucks on your dirt pile, and you're like, what we should do is infrastructure while we're playing
What
trucks.
we need here is a Hoover Dam.
Yeah, exactly. So the Hoover Dam's already built. You can go back and look at the previous video. And this is the one at the bridge, which I think this drives it home even more for me, because it's like you get to test the building techniques that you see used. And you're never going to get to be the foreman on a huge infrastructure project like this that takes 10 years of your life, or I don't even know how long the Hoover Dam took. But like if you go to 5.5 minutes into this video, you'll see some really awesome stuff, like using these sacrificial towers in order to loop wires, so support wires down to support the forms while you're pouring the arch. And then after the arch is hardened, the support wires are removed, and the sacrificial towers, which were themselves made of cement, are removed. And then you measure out where you need the struts coming up from the arch to support the roadway. And so then holes for rebar and epoxied rebar stubs are put into them, which is definitely a thing when you talk about like securing anchors to cement. And then more rebar structures are put on top of those stubs, and forms are lowered down on them to make more columns. So all around, I think it's a really interesting way of exploring what these techniques are. I don't see why it would be all that much different from real life. I mean, obviously different loads and different sizes, but yeah, scale. But I mean, I think you could just get an intuitive feel for a lot of this stuff just by doing this, which is super cool. I also have to say that someone calling themselves Joe wins the internet this week by dropping into the comments on this article the perfect XKCD that proves that if you're doing HO scale model railroading and you do it of your own neighborhood, you can only do like 6 levels of reproducing the model that's at your house or in your backyard before it's too small and it's at the atomic scale.
When I hit the stop button here, that's interesting. Card full. Well, I recorded it locally. So, my first quick hack this week is from Mike Molinari, aka MM is Cool. Erasable pen ink adds colors to 3D prints. And I learned in this project that erasable pen ink isn't actually erasable because of any funny chemical properties of the eraser they use on it. It's just a heat-sensitive ink that disappears when it gets hot. So when you hit it with the eraser, you're rubbing it hard enough to make enough friction to heat it up. Why is this relevant? Mike takes this same erasable ink pigment and puts it in a 3D printing filament. So the intensity of the color it has varies with how high it's been heated as it's being extruded. This is a really interesting take on multicolor, multi-temperature extrusion. Next up, Seabird HH. Duolux is a stylish lamp, and you should definitely print your own. This is a really marvelous lamp build. It's kind of a folding lamp. It looks like 2 automobile headlights. And what really sells it is these super lenses that he puts in front of the 2.5 watt warm white LEDs in the back. They're not actually made out of lenses, though. They're made out of this funny building material that has a structure that's like cardboard, but it's made out of polycarbonate. The stuff only comes in 1 meter by 2 meter sheets, and here he just needs 2 little circles. But if you look at it, it's totally worth it. Last up, Project Hermit's robots mimic crab with mechanical shells. This is a multi-purpose robot project by Ken Nakagaki. These are little Sony robot toys. They're called Toyo, and he's hacked them to have a servo that pushes a pin up and down out of their top, and then they drive into a bunch of little shells. The pin engages with it, and then the robot either spins on the inside or moves the shell around or pushes a lever up and down using its servo to make the kind of bigger robot that is the shell plus the motor do something cool. You should watch the video. He's really pushed this to the extreme. One of them is a fan. He gangs a couple of them together to lift things up in the air. It's really marvelous exploration of a simple idea.
First up for me, the most important device in the universe is powered by a 555 timer. This is kind of a fascinating look at how the sausage is made for sci-fi television and movies. If you had to build every single futuristic looking thing in every scene for every show, you could just never afford to do anything. And so back in 1977, a guy named John Zabrucki founded a company that all they do is provide sci-fi looking props to whoever wants to rent them, which is pretty awesome. And in this case, it's one that looks like a tube that has a laser going through it, and you get to drill down inside of it and find out that yes, indeed, it has a 555 timer. Next up, making Linux offline voice recognition easier. Al Williams wrote this one about the glue that takes a project that needs voice recognition and takes a voice recognition training set and makes them get into the same room and have a fun time together. So it really is one thing to be able to have the training set and to be able to discern what is being spoken and then to actually do something useful beyond just knowing what each one word is. So this allows you to do a better job of putting together phrases and making them work in your projects. And finally, put a landscape scanner on your bike and ride. Lewin Day wrote this one about a project by Celian31 that is exactly what it looks like. It's a line scanner for the everyday world. It is run by a Raspberry Pi with a camera, and it sits under the saddle on the bicycle and shoots off to the side. And so you get this kind of like progressive panorama of all the cars along the side of the street or all the buildings along the side of the street. And there's software magic that stitches all of these images together. And yet you still get this kind of like wobbly view as the bumps and the roll of the road go by. And I think it would be really interesting to go to famous places with this and put together panoramic images and then frame them and sell them in your Etsy store. Was that too capitalistic? It's time for our Can't Miss Articles of the Week. This is long-form content written by excellent Hackaday authors, and Elliot, you get the first pick today.
This week I picked Gopher, the competing standard to www in the 90s, is still worth checking out. And this is an article written by a brand new writer with us and super retro computing aficionado, Chris Wilkinson. And in this, he goes through the history of Gopher, which is kind of the proto-web that lost out to the World Wide Web. Back in the early 1990s, right about when HTML was being invented, there were a bunch of centralized information servers in the University of Minnesota, and they invented a protocol to send this data out to you. And this was the Gopher system. Basically, Gopher was text-based in the beginning, but it still has a lot of similarities to what we think of as the web nowadays. For instance, there was an early index of it, so you could search all of the things out there in the Gopher world. And that's kind of course, the precursor to today's internet search engines, without which we could not live. Basically, the things that Gopher did differently, I think, from the web is that it was a lot more kind of hierarchically structured, and it ran on bigger servers, mostly at universities and things like this. It was kind of like a curated, controlled World Wide Web, if you will. And I think that's actually part of the reason for its demise was that the University of Minnesota had a bunch of patents on some of the Gopher stuff and didn't let people just run wild with it like the folks at CERN did with what would become the World Wide Web.
I think I remember this from being in a computer lab at the University of North Dakota when I was still like a middle school or maybe a high school student in the 90s and seeing it there. And so like the University of North Dakota would have licensed the server from the University of Minnesota where it was invented. And then Minnesota are the Golden Gophers. Their mascot is, that's why they call it Gopher. I would say the WWW, World Wide Web, back then was also like in an awkward stage. Like neither of them were very easy to use. And I remember there was some class at the library, at the high school library, or maybe it was the middle school library that was teaching us like how to use search engines. And they would like, there was a printed piece of paper that had like Lycos on there, all those search engines.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing turned up great things at the time. So it was all pretty awkward. I do think the ability to like stand up a page on Gopher was probably a little bit more gatekept than it was for www. And then the other thing that Chris mentions in here that I think is interesting is that HTML, the hypertext menuing language, was embraced by www, not by Gopher. And if you think about all the shenanigans that people were like, you know, trying to make their web pages do things and make them look neat, like you have that inbuilt gaming the system of like, oh, what can I do with this? What can I do with this? That might have also helped sway people over to one side or the other.
But I think Chris makes an interesting point here, which is that it's still worth looking at. And he goes through a few modern Gopher servers, clients, etc. And they're useful if you want to test out retro computers. Everything's super fast. If you're really just trying to get text across, you have no idea how quickly a Gopher page loads up for you. So there's an interesting kind of retro hackers take the old ball and run with it scene going on now in the Gopher sphere. And I think that's really kind of fun. There's also this like, I don't know what it was with the mid-90s. There was this push to make everything VR that could be VR. And so there were like VR file systems, and my favorite / least favorite of these, the most awkward of these has to be Gopher VR, where they had like pages of text from the Gopherverse floating around in a 3D space. So you had to like walk up to them and read them because, again, it's still just, letters in a window, but it's letters in a window floating in space. Virtual reality, man.
It's like that one recently where it was Wikipedia or some other text-rich thing was put into Minecraft, and so you had to go and like open a chest and pull out a Minecraft book and look and open it up and flip through it. Like it's that physical thing. And I mean, you and I have definitely talked about this before. I feel that like the printed page has for like reference books has a much stronger ability to interface with your brain because you kind of remember physically where in the book, which side, left side or right side of the page, which part of the page things were on. And you get that like cathedral of the mind sort of effect. And so, it wasn't misguided to try that on Gopher. It just also didn't feel intuitive.
I think in the end, the World Wide Web is too big for that kind of spatial model. Like Hackaday has 40,000 pages? Can you imagine having to run down this long neighborhood to try to find... Like, where was that one from like 5 years ago? That was that great hack. Let's see. So I got to go about 10 kilometers that way and then turn to the left and run about another 15 virtual kilometers that way. I mean...
But you would never do it as 10 kilometers. You'd be like, that one's in Soho, but the other one's in the Bronx, right?
Yeah, maybe you could you could just teleport there if you remembered which year was where and stuff. I don't know, man.
You can't teleport there. You got to take the subway.
Oh, dude. Yeah, so this is what happened to the virtual reality mapping of proto web pages like that. Nonetheless, this is an enchanting view of Gopher, and like Chris says, it's a nostalgia trip, and it's one that whether you were around for first wave Gopher or not, you should definitely take.
Well, from virtual reality to real reality, let's talk about how cars make their way across the ocean, Elliot.
Oh, this is very real reality.
Dan Maloney wrote a great article called Ro-Ro Vessels, that's R-O-R-O, Driving Cars Across the Ocean. That acronym stands for Roll On, Roll Off. And this is a ship. It's a cargo ship, but it doesn't take the containers like you might be thinking. It's basically a parking garage built inside of a hull. And so when this thing pulls up to port, it drops the gangplank, and you get teams and teams of drivers in there to fire up the automobiles that are in this floating parking garage and drive them off of the ship and maybe drive others on. The scale of this is pretty amazing. So 8,000 cars. And I was trying to figure this out, Jeez. Elliot. Like, how do you describe 8,000 cars, right? That's difficult. When I was editing the article, I was looking for a photograph of, like, I don't know, the Mall of America or somewhere else that had like a huge parking garage. It actually works better on a radio show. This is about half of what the original Disneyland parking lot could accommodate.
Oh,
so two of these ships would be a completely full original Disneyland.
That is crazy. And the really crazy thing about these is not just that it's a big ship / parking lot, but that when they get into dock, they have to unload a bunch of these cars. And that's like the biggest traffic jam at Disney World you've ever seen. Except here, time, of course, is money. And the game is to get as many drivers on there and run things as orderly and logistically properly as you possibly can to get these cars out.
Yeah, they work in teams. So you actually have a passenger van, like 15 people, or, I'm just guessing on the size of these vans. Those big white vans that you can fit 3 or 4 across on several rows that drive you into the area where the cars are. And then everybody jumps out and gets in the car. And then very rapidly, like, they're not going slow inside of this thing.
Hauling.
Yeah, they're whipping around. And then on the opposite end of it, when they're bringing them in, they're parking them close together. Like, you start on one end and you park all the way to the other end, and you can only get out one side of the cars as you're parking because they're so close. I mean, they're centimeters apart from one another. They do have more room in front or in back because they're strapping them down to holes in the deck. So they have ratchet straps that connect. I was thinking they were going to be like those cages, those webbing cages that go over tires and hold the tires down. But it looks like they actually are hooks that go on either the body on the front and back, or they can connect directly to the wheels themselves. And they have it. When I was looking at the videos of this, which are very interesting, they have at least 4 straps on the front and the back. So they have 2 straps at each of 4 different points that keep these things. If you think about, I mean, some of those Pacific crossings that I've seen, it's crazy. Yeah. And
when the boat's going up and down 2 meters, pitching and heaving and left and right, you don't want the cars breaking loose.
Yeah. So it's an incredible thing. And I mean, what did I think they were doing? I didn't think to myself,
right?
Every new car goes in its own shipping container. Like, that's not, you can do that if you're sending some high value car somewhere. You and I, before the show, I mentioned, like, where did I think BMWs were coming from when they get, made in Germany and end up in the United States? How did I think they get here?
They put them in the mailbox, and they just take them to the corner, put it in the mailbox, and then it gets to you. Like how mail does.
You wait for the winter and you take the Northwest Passage over the ice. That's all the time we have for this episode of the Hackaday podcast. As always, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment in the show notes. You'll find them at hackaday.com/podcast. You can email us, editor@hackaday.com. We live and die by the tips that you send us, so if you do something cool or you see something cool, please tell us. tips@hackaday.com. And until next time,
keep on hacking. Do I have enough disk space? That's good enough.
Isn't that the one? Robots.
No, you just go, what about hacks or something? I'll go, how am I gonna...
Oh, wait. Oh, no, I gotta finish. I had a different finish.
No.
Nope.
No,
not gonna do it.